All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry, there were some problems with getting into the breakout rooms and everything. The technology is getting there. Hopefully, it'll get better. So now's the best time to send in through chat what you think your research question will be, or just an example of one that you're thinking about. And try to put it in the form of a question, and try to make it just a sentence. And it's a harder thing to write less than to write more. Okay, so try putting those in, and while you're doing that, let me just answer some questions that have come up before and that came up this morning that I think are worth answering. So the whole process, it's now December, and if you're thinking of applying to come to the program that starts in January 2018 in the first or the Pioneer class, then this is what your schedule should be as you go forward. Between now and April, you should be focusing on the classes, but you should start thinking about maybe a project that you're interested in and trying to see if there's a company or the company you're currently working with has some kind of data or some kind of problem. So this is like, remember the stage gate process? All of you have gone through SC0x. So when new product development's the stage gate process, where you start with a lot of ideas, and as it gets more firm, you have a slightly higher level of scrutiny. That's what we're doing here. We're in the first stage right now, and the first gate will be the application process, and that opens from April to June. And during that application process, in addition to some other things, you'll be submitting a 2-page write-up of your proposal of what you think your research project should be. We would hopefully, and we are favoring more modeling-oriented or mathematical or analytically oriented projects, but that is not to say that they shouldn't have any qualitative aspect to them. Usually the best projects and theses combine both. But so between now and April, you're in that first stage and you're thinking about it. April to June, when you submit your application, you're gonna have to write a formal proposal. The admission decisions happen between June through the end of the summer, and people are informed in, I think, mid-July. And then you need to make your final decisions, if offered, to apply, if you accept that. And so in like mid-August, we will know who is planning on coming. That moves to the next gate, and we'll start focusing with you a little more and helping you shape up your project, making sure the company is on board, making sure you understand the methodology you're going to use. And we'll focus on that throughout the fall. In early December, we'll want you to submit a little more formal description of what your project's going to be, to include a detailed plan. Now, when you hit the ground in January, one of the first things you're going to realize is that it's almost time for graduation, right? Because it'll go so fast while you're here. It's 5 months, and it'll move in a blink of an eye. So the reason why we're doing all this advanced work is to make sure you can hit the ground running, that you can actually move and actually graduate in time in June. Because these research projects, they're not like homeworks. They're excuse me, they tend to be open-ended. And so we want to make sure you have as much prep work before you hit and are taking classes and doing other things as well coming to MIT. So that's what I wanted to say. Is there anything I missed on the dates or anything, Eva?
No, I think the dates are perfectly covered.
Okay. So then what other questions we have concerning those?
One question is about advising. When are they going to receive some advice from our side before applying to the blended program, or after?
Yeah, they are, because there's so many of you and so few of us, the real advice on it won't really happen until you've been admitted. I think it's a very good thing on the discussion forums, and once the portal for all the MicroMasters program gets on board, for you guys to discuss back and forth. I think it's a good thing to get feedback from each other, but we won't start really giving detailed feedback or suggestions until we have the class kind of picked. That's the way that we're going to address it, just for scarce resources.
Yeah, great. So regarding research questions,
I've got the first one though. Someone brought it in first, and the question was basically, it was a long paragraph, but let me try to winnow out what I think the real question was. I work for a large company, and I think I have problems in the company. How can I come up with a research project that is general enough to be research, but still can help my company? So how can I thread that or walk that line where it's generalizable, but it actually has benefits and is applicable to my company? This is common. This happened. This is the best project. You should aim for that. So some examples. We did a project with Procter & Gamble not too recently to help them identify a better phantom inventory detector. And what this does, it tries to capture when something is out of stock on the shelf, but the system says it's there, And typically people wait like 21 days before they notice that it's really not selling. And so come up with a way based on their data with one of their retail customers to figure out, okay, how can I figure this out faster? Now, that's something that helped P&G, but it's very generalizable. So the approach can be used by any retailer or any manufacturer selling to a retailer, and it's looking at certain correlations between different products. Another example that you all should know from SC0x, when we talked about the news vendor problem, NFL jerseys. That was actually a thesis that was done by two students with Reebok, which is at that point in time held the contract for the National Football League jerseys, the football jerseys. And so that was the one where they came up with a critical ratio where they determined when they should manufacture things in Indianapolis or manufacture them, I believe it was in the Philippines or Indonesia. And so they created a ratio based on the stability of the orders. And so it was something very useful to Reebok, but then now it turned into a case study and it's widely used for people to help determine their stocking points and their replenishment policies. So almost all of these theses, if they solve a problem, the next step is, okay, what would make this generalizable? Just think about the characteristics or the framework, and then it's not that hard of a step. So it's actually very common, and it's not that hard to do.
Okay. Perfect. One more research question. So how are the big companies analyzing and preparing their supply chains to a world that will have huge changes in transportation modes, technologies, demand, etc.? The idea would be to obtain a model that allows to prepare constantly to the changes that are expected.
That's way too big.
Yeah.
You must add in world peace. So the whole idea here, one of the things that we try to do when an idea comes is to winnow it down for the scope. So that was a very large piece of it. So what you might want to do is say, okay, pick one of those. So maybe instead of all transportation, pick a region. And so this is happening a lot, and we're focused in with some companies here in the U.S. because there's a lot of changes in last mile delivery with omni-channel kind of distribution, the blending of online versus pick up in the store. And so there are projects saying, okay, as this trend increases, how will it disrupt or change my transportation? And so I would pick a piece of that and start and solve that for your thesis. One of the things that you need to think about, and students do this all the time, they define their project as this massive thing, but you only have 5 months once you're here. And so after having done this for about 15 years, we know how to skinny it down and narrow down the scope. And that means, this is why for research, you have to solve the relevant pieces, not the whole thing. And so you want to come up with insights for one specific problem. So it's a good approach, it's a little big. And so we need to narrow that down. The other thing you want to think about is how would you answer that question, right? And so that would be the other challenge.
And I would say that in this case, how to solve this question is going to help them to narrow the scope for this specific project.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, more things. What effect does the length of or complexity of a supply chain have on the overall cost of the system?
Yeah, so the length of a supply chain, I assume that means number of companies in the supply chain, the length of the supply chain or complexity.
Of complexity.
So let's see. So let's say we're going to do that. So let's say it's the complexity of the supply chain. How does that affect the cost? Two problems there. It's not a bad question. How are you going to measure complexity? We talked about that, I believe, in SC0x, and there are different ways. If you can look at SKUs, you can look at the percentage of SKUs that contribute a certain margin, but you have to come up with a metric of complexity, and then you have to say, okay, increasing costs. How am I going to determine which companies have different costs? So first, you'd have to try to clarify exactly what you mean. Then let's go to the next stage. So if the question is, how does complexity increase the cost of a supply chain? I now need to look at and say, how am I going to capture that? What method am I going to use? I guess you could use a survey and ask some questions of different companies to be able to measure their complexity and then measure their costs. But the challenge is going to be, how are you going to compare them? So that's a tricky one, just because people define complexity very differently, and you're going to have to figure a way to normalize for costs. So if a car manufacturer said they have a very complex supply chain and their products are blah, versus another company that makes bricks and they have something else, how are you going to compare the costs? So you have to, that one would be a challenge because it's murky terms. I think you could turn it into something that's more of an opinion piece, and that's a danger. You want to make sure that it's something that you can use a method to kind of answer the question. Okay?
Okay, yeah. One more. How can uncertainty be incorporated into drug forecasting in humanitarian emergency response?
Okay, so uncertainty of what? Of demand, I guess?
Of demand,
So how
I
can
guess,
my
into
uncertainty
drug
of demand, well, if you're forecasting, you have uncertain demand, right? Because if there's not uncertain demand, then it's not, forecasting is trivial. So I assume for humanitarian response, so forget the drug, it's just humanitarian response. How do I better forecast for humanitarian response events? That's a great project, and we've done ones like that before. So let's think, how would you work on that? You would need to get access to some organizations for maybe some different events and see how well they did. What were the forecasts for the needs of different materials and how did they actually do, and be able to try to come up with a method that you could try to use using all the techniques we taught you in SC0x to see if you can come up with a better technique that has a lower MAPE, for example, or a lower root mean square error of the existing forecasts. You could try it, what would be really interesting, you'd use it on past data, but then try to run a pilot. This would be tough in 5 months with an organization here, or try to then test it somewhere else. So it's a good thesis. It might be tough to do it within 5 months, but it's not bad. And Dr. Jared Gensel focuses on this area. He has a humanitarian response lab that does a lot of projects in this area and might have data. And so that's not a bad project.
One general question. Is it required to have a company sponsor for the research project?
It is not. It's preferred, but if you have any kind of open source data, that's fine. We've done projects that have looked at, that have used a lot of data that's available from government sources, whether it's flow on of traffic or whether it's census data, trade data. You can use that data. The important thing is not pick the data and ask a question. It's come with a question and say, okay, what data do I need? And so the questions should drive or dictate the data requirements that you have.
Related to data and companies, most companies are very jealous with their data. How do students and researchers convince companies to share data suitable for a quantitative analysis?
Yeah, so it's always a challenge, but there's different ways. The nice thing is that for research and for the company, we have different things we want to protect, and different things are important to us. For companies, they're very confidentiality of data is very important. So if we get cost data, say, for a bunch of SKUs that they're selling through, they don't want that shared, right? But as a researcher, we really don't care if an item costs $17.50 or $22. For our analysis, it doesn't matter. We just need order of magnitude. So when you publish or release the research, what you'll do is not release the raw data. It's the insights in the analysis. So you can disguise the numbers, right? We can multiply it by a random factor, up or down. You can not use the company's name. You can disguise it in many different ways. It's very common because what the company wants to protect is the confidentiality of their exact data. What we care about as researchers is are the insights that come out of it, that we pull out of it. So the beautiful thing is they're not mutually exclusive goals. So it usually works fairly well. Having said that, sometimes getting the data itself is tough for companies just because it can be a painful process. Companies' data systems are generally not as good as we would like them to be.
Definitely. Yeah. One more research question. What factors make for an efficient warehousing operation given a business with high variability of incoming parts, with a specific focus on reaching an optimal level of inventory to both meet production requirements as well as be compliant with cash flow restraints?
Yeah, that's
determined by accounting.
Again, this is
finance.
It's a very long sentence.
It's a very long one.
So the real thing is what factors make for efficient warehousing operation when you have incoming high variability. So you could do this. So let's think about how you would solve that, how you would research that. You could set up a simulation. And the simulation, since you're looking at warehousing, I'm guessing you would look at either pick or the put away. And so you could set up rules. And so you have certain products coming in of a certain variability. So that's my random variable. And you might have rules of how things get put away. It'd be a little tricky how you'd set that up. But by doing that, you could then set different policies and see how well they do. So you could try to simulate essentially a warehouse. Another way to do it, it would be more econometric, and you try to meet or talk with a bunch of different companies and understand what they do for current practices and try and draw some conclusions from that. Do a regression to see if there's any correlations or if there's any similarities with the way the approaches are. So there's two ways you could answer that. I would probably try to have you narrow down, because the way you worded your question, you had a specific answer in mind, and that's something you have to be very careful. I think we'd have to reduce the scope a little bit on all the aspects you're asking for and start with something simple. What we typically find is students try to, like I said, boil the ocean and do the big project, and maybe you'll get to that, but you should always start small. Start small, answer something, then add a complexity, add a complexity. Mm-hmm. It's called the spiral method. It's a common way of creating software, and it works very well for research. Solve a little problem, keep adding to it, adding to it, adding to it.
Yeah, okay. Great. What else? This is another general question. I think they need to limit the scope. Which demand forecasting algorithm would be best fit to the apparel industry? Okay,
so the question is what forecasting method would be appropriate for the apparel industry?
This specific industry,
That's too broad, because the apparel industry, as we know, is it goes from white T-shirts to Zara fashion items. So I think what you could do is a couple different things. You could look to segment. How should you segment apparel and match appropriate forecasting tools to it? And so it could be a segmentation project, as well as trying to match different forecasting techniques. That would require you to have data. So if you're not working for an apparel company, that's going to be tough. So I think that's what it would require.
Yeah, I would say, or maybe you can propose a methodology for SQ certification. This is something that is also useful in this industry. But again, you need data to do that. Yeah.
So that would probably be a very it's a good thesis, but you would need to skinny it down a little bit, because there isn't just apparel industry, it's a wide portfolio.
And choose a specific problem.
Yeah.
What else? How do you optimally balance cost of forecast error with cost of forecasting resources?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
that's
Jeff Baker.
Yeah, Jeff. So I wish we could do that. You know what the hard part that I found for that is that people, it's the forecast errors and the soft costs are harder to capture. So it would be really interesting to do that, to try to see if you could capture that, because people are very good. I mean, you could look at the cost of forecasting resources, I think, but you would need to be inside a company. I don't think this is just a company giving you data. You'd have to do a lot of interviews to look at time spent. And it's also, what's hard is the time spent by people not directly involved. So you can do the head count of the forecasting department, but maybe some of those soft meetings where everyone gets drawn into it, that it's not their job. But also the forecast accuracy, the cost of forecast error, there's the direct piece of that, and where you look at either overstocking or shortages, but there's also indirect costs there. So I think it's a good thesis. That'd be hard to get. It'd be an interesting one to read. So I think the challenge would be getting the right data. But it's a good topic.
Yeah. One related to drones. How can demand forecasting prevent customer orders to optimally route delivery drones?
How can demand forecasting?
I think it's prompt, no?
Prompt customer orders to optimally route delivery drones. That's fine. And so so a lot of times what you guys are doing is loading in your question with some answers. So really the question is, how can drones fit into my transportation options, right? When would it make sense for me to use drones for delivery? So think of it in this way. Think of it just another form of transportation with different characteristics. This is how you kind of make something generalizable. So what are the characteristics you need for transportation? Speed, transit time, amount of advance notice, its carrying capacity, its cost, all these different things. And so now what I have is a different framework. So now we want to say, okay, what products under what conditions make sense for that. For example, we're doing one of our labs here, the Mega Cities Logistics Lab, does a lot of work with delivery in urban areas. And one of the things, and I think I made this for SC0x, might have been one of the graded assignment questions. I adapted a real problem where you want to determine you have different types of delivery vans in a city. Let's say I have straight trucks that are 25 feet. I have little delivery vans. I also have push carts, and I also have like bicycles. And so each one of those modes of transportation has different characteristics, and they travel on a different network, right? So that that K factor, if you think back to a continuous approximation in urban areas, is different. Their speed is different. Their cost is different. Well, drones would just fit within that. It doesn't matter that it's a drone or that it's a llama. It doesn't matter. When you think about it, this is how you make it generalizable. You think about the characteristics that it fit, and then you map those together. So yeah, that would be a great project. My prediction is drones wouldn't do anything except in remote areas, but me and Amazon don't always agree.
Yeah. No, but I think he was more proposing about optimized route deliveries for drones, for a specific drone. So
what do you think?
I think then they need a specific case with origin and destination points.
Yeah, so I don't see routing for delivery. I think they're point to point.
I don't see that because it's very specific for one specific area. So
yeah,
I think it's to compare with other modes.
Yeah, it's a point to point. I don't see it as a multi-stop kind of thing for drones.
This is a point to point
because its payload is too small.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see what we have here. This is a new one. How to optimize the use of the building information modeling process in a real estate operation regarding to an unequal development of the tools among the stakeholders.
I have no idea what that means. I don't know what the building information modeling process is, so I'm no help to you there. We'd have to try to take some of the jargon out of it. So to understand what it really is, I really don't know what that means. Sorry.
Me neither. Sorry. Yeah.
It's a little baffling to me.
Are there any materials? Okay, so are there any materials you would recommend for people to learn from how to formulate research as opposed to
let me put something together, and I'll send something out to just the people in the pipeline, you guys in the verified categories. Give me a couple weeks. I'm kind of strapped right now, finishing up SC0x. But yeah, let me put something together, and I can point to some references. There's some really good books about the idea of research and things. That's not a problem. I'll give you something for that.
We can include this.
But the best thing to do, if this is your fourth course, hopefully, and you've been taking this verified, you've been going to the MicroMasters or verified supplemental materials, I must have put more than 30 theses now in those different sections.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to look at. Look at the existing projects that have come out. Half the cases that I talk about in the classes came from a thesis. If you look at the medical devices one, when I do inventory into a hospital, the NFL jerseys, the Shopco, which is really Home Depot, you have all of these usually come from a thesis. And I usually put the thesis, the research project reference in the guide, in the supplemental area. Mm-hmm. So look for those. That's the best thing to look at to say, okay, I understand what a research project is.
Yeah. So. Another general question about how they can look for literature review and which is the best source for a literature review.
Yeah. So that when people in doing formal research, like for a dissertation, a literature review means something very specific. And so in this area, because these are more practical, it's more exploring what other people, what other companies have done in a certain area. So I would start with Google Scholar. That's not a bad place to look for things. Going on just to start investigating a topic, I always make the claim that Wikipedia is a great place to start. It's just a bad place to finish. Make sure you go deeper. But there are all sorts of journals that you can actually get access to through Google Scholar. And if you find, say, a paper, a refereed paper that talks about the topic you're interested in, then what you can do is find those authors and see other things that those authors wrote, or go to the back of it and see who they cited. And so it's a way of diving in like roots in a tree. And so you can go deeper and find additional sources or papers that might be relevant. But a lot of what you'll be doing is almost a business literature review. as well as the technology or the methodology literature review as well.
Okay, one more research question.
Okay.
What model is required to optimally prepare ambulances to minimize response time?
Okay,
More
so
specific one.
yeah, so this is when I was in the U.S. Army in the 80s, we had something called POMCUS sites, and this was when the Cold War was going to happen, right? We had pre-positioned equipment, whether it was weapons, equipment, whatever, and humanitarian agencies do this as well. They don't put weapons, obviously, but the Red Cross will do this and put areas pre-positioned. So the question is, where should I locate on a network materials in advance of potential events that happen at an uncertain location at an uncertain time? It's a great question. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do. I could see setting up a simulation. You could set up an optimization, actually, and figure out, based on certain demand, it's almost like a network design question. So that's a great topic. I could see a bunch of different ways you could approach that. For the ambulance, it's you're just reducing your scale, so that might even be easier to use. It'd be interesting if you partnered up with a government or a city government to get data on where incidents happen, and then try to solve a real case. But what you'll find probably is that the techniques and methodologies you use are generalizable. Yeah, that's a great topic. That's a great thesis. That'd be fun.
This is a good topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other general question?
We're about done. We have a minute or two left. Is there anything that we should talk about that we talked about this morning? What do you think, Ahmad? Anything I missed?
No, I think we covered.
Okay. All right. Any
Anything,
last
Arthur?
questions? Type now or forever hold your peace. All right, so we'll have more Hangouts, and as the new year starts, we'll start having more informal discussions, I think, just on general topics that are relevant to people completing the MicroMasters and considering coming to the blended program, and it'll be just for those people. So we'll try to get the frequency of discussion a little more focused and a little more frequent, like I said, going in the new year. And we'll try to do more at this time of day. Sorry it took us so long to do them at a later in the afternoon for us. Anything we can do to make it more relevant, we'll probably start alternating the times or doing something. All right.
Okay.
Do we have anything else, or are we done?
I think we are done.
Are we good?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.